Cool. So without any more delay, I'm going to go
Moon,
ahead.
moon craters?
Oh, wrong, that's the wrong screen.
Oh, no, that's okay. So that's a topic you think we should maybe do?
That's what somebody had suggested.
You know what? I'll do it at some later date. I'll take that one because I did that talk on lunar evolution not too long ago. So moon craters, I've already got half the information for that.
Yeah, that was not the screen I wanted to share.
So I won't do an astronomer. Someone else can do an astronomer next month. I'll do my man and universe talk.
And sorry about that. I still a new laptop. My monitor setups are not what they normally were because there's been some issues with it. So thanks for joining. There's quite a few people on here I don't actually recognize. So welcome. Gonna get my thing set up. So for those that are joining us now for the first time, this is the general monthly meeting for the Astronomy Fundamentals Group. This meeting normally has gives out two presentations. One on we spent the last several years going through all of the constellations, and so now that we've kind of worked through all 88 of them, we're moving on to some other topics, such as spotlighting astronomers who have made us interesting contributions to the field. Starting tonight with Edwin Hubble. We also have what we refer to as a main topic, which is just a member presentation on anything that in astronomy covers a wide range of interests. We've done presentations on equipment, eyepieces, types of astronomical objects, all over the place. And that generally forms the bulk of the meeting. We also thanks to Doug and his efforts, we will be resuming what has been the Astronomy Fundamentals class, which is basically an introductory course onto observing and amateur equipment. You can reach out to Doug for more information on that. I will post his email address near the end of the meeting. Well, a contact email for the group so that you can get your questions to him if you want more information about that.
You can just tell him right now the class will be in September.
Okay. Yeah. I just didn't know if the syllabus for the course was changing, so that's why I was kind of like being iffy on that because I didn't know what changes you had. I know you were redoing some of the things in there.
Actually, this time around, May wanted me to, because we have a whole bunch of the books. We still have about 25 of the books. She wants me to not change any of the materials until we run out of books.
Okay.
So probably this session, and if I teach it again in the spring, which I probably will, it'll probably be exactly the same content that we've taught in the past. And then when we get to the point where we're low on books, I'll go through and change some of the stuff.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So in that case, the general format of that class is it's 3 Saturdays,
Right.
about 8-hour sessions each. Day one covers, I think, equipment basics. Day two is astronomical objects, and then day three is.
I'm sorry, I told you wrong. The class is in October.
October. Thank you.
It's October 8, 15, and 22nd, which are 3 consecutive Saturdays.
Cool. And I forget what day three is.
Day
I know it's equipment, observing techniques, and then astronomical objects are the gamut of things that we normally go over.
Day 3 is observing basics like locating objects, star hopping, planetarium programs, observing the moon, observing the planets, observing the stars. talking about star parties, deep sky objects, and
Yeah.
surveys.
So definitely a must for people who are good recommendation for people who are starting out doing visual astronomy. Some of it's also a good primer for those who are interested in the imaging side, but this is not an imaging oriented class, so don't expect anything significant on that front. It is very much geared more towards visual observers.
The idea of the class is we're going to teach you all about the basics of telescopes, different types of telescopes, eyepieces, how to use them. We'll be talking about what kind of stuff you should have in terms of equipment, all the basic information about stars and deep sky objects, Hertzsprung-Russell diagram, all the basics. And the idea of all this basic information is to help you understand the various talks, like the talks we give at the general meetings and the talks we give here at AFSig. It provides you with a lot of introductory information that's very useful and will help you understand those talks better.
And some of those materials we actually have covered in our own meetings and a little bit more in depth. So we do have some archive presentations that cover some of those topics that may that we can also send to you after you take the class if you're still having some questions on some of the materials.
Right.
And with that, go ahead and jump into the presentation for the night. So due to some scheduling issues, there will only, the presentation night will only be this presentation on Edwin Hubble. We had to defer our other presentation until next month. So with that, go ahead and come on slideshow. Gotta organize myself a little bit here. So kind of off the heels of this week's James Webb reveal, we're gonna circle back to Edwin Hubble, who is the namesake astronomer of the Hubble Space Telescope. His name is probably familiar to more people in this room, but there's a lot of things about him that are probably most of us aren't familiar with in terms of his life. We may know, some of us in this room may know some of his more significant contributions to the astronomy field, such as Hubble's law, but it seemed like an appropriate place to start with this new Astronomer Spotlight series. So come on, keyboard. My keyboard works. There we go. So Edwin Hubble was born on November 20th in 1889 to John Powell and Virginia Lee Hubble. John Powell was an insurance manager / executive, and his mom was a stay-at-home parent, stay-at-home mom, which is more or less typical of women during this time period. He had 8 siblings in all. I think it was evenly split between 4 brothers and 4 sisters. One of his siblings, Virginia, noted here, died in their infancy. I was not able to actually find names for the other 3 of his siblings in my research, but also it wasn't really much information about anything of note about the siblings that I could find either. And also was unable to see if where exactly Hubble fit. It feels like he's one of the middle children, but in terms of like how far off, if he like the 3rd oldest or the 3rd youngest, I couldn't find anything. It seems like he's more like the 3rd oldest in the family from some of the articles and phrasing that I was interpreting. So Hubble was actually a very avid book reader. He began reading sometime around the age of 3 in an effort to keep up with 2 of his older siblings who had just begun their time in elementary school. He was a significant fan of science fiction and enjoyed reading books from Jules Verne and an author who I was not familiar with, who brought H. Ryder. I think that might be a typo on my part from autocorrect, but H. Ryder Haggard, I hope that's correct, and Jules Verne, who we are all many a very popular science fiction writer, and was one of his personal favorite books is commonly cited to be 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. His grandfather was actually the inspiration for much of Hubble's later endeavors with astronomy. His grandfather himself was an amateur astronomer at the time, And he gifted Hubble his first telescope at the age of 7. And as the story goes, is that Hubble was so eager to use this new telescope that he decided that he would rather stay up at night rather than have an 8th birthday party. As an 8-year-old, I'm pretty sure I would not have that same opinion. I would very much like to have the cake.
Especially at that age, huh?
Yeah, so very, very interesting in the enthusiasm that he showed there. So skipping on to his high school time, so his dad, being an insurance executive, traveled extensively around what I presume is the central U.S. And I have a Zoom thing blocking my slides, so I can't read it. And they eventually moved from Hubble's hometown in Marshfield, Missouri, excuse me, to Wheaton, Illinois in around 1900. I saw another article that said 1889, 1900, it varies. And around this time, Hubble, about 5 years later, he enrolled in what is Wheaton High School near Chicago. And he was, by many accounts, an extremely bright student, excelling in all of his subjects, never making anything lower than a 95 by what many biographers cited in his own records. He was also a very active in athletics, including basketball, track, and he was a fairly competent boxer. There's several indications that fight promoters actually tried to get him to turn him into the pro leagues. He was also a very, as being a heavyweight boxer, he was very solidly built. His full-grown height was around 6 feet 2 inches tall, so he was a very big man. Over his high school career, he won 7 first place positions and a 3rd place award at a single track and field meet. That's so he was in 8 events in the single meet and won first place in 7 of them. And he also managed at the time to break what was the state's high jump record, setting it from what it was previously to a record setting 5 feet 8 inches. I'm not sure what the record is now. It is most certainly higher than that, given the changes in athletics and equipment that have been over the years.
Oh, it's over 7 feet now.
But not
Yeah, but
surprising.
not for a high schooler. For a college, it'd be 7 feet. High schoolers
okay.
probably 6.5.
Okay.
Yeah, so, but still.
And this was before the Fosbury flop.
Way before Fosbury.
Yeah. So Hubble graduated high school at the age of 16 and moved on to college and accepted a full ride scholarship to the University of Chicago. From there, he he continued his athletics, participating in the university's basketball team, where he actually led the Chicago Cubs to their first title. So, if any Chicago University basketball fans in the crew, you can credit Edwin Hubble for their first title conference. Make all the sports fans very mad that an astronomer nerd set history for them. He also, kept up with his athletics, and he graduated with a bachelor's with credits in physics and astronomy in 1910. I'm not sure if that's his actual degree. I think if it was a general science degree with credits in astronomy, but there wasn't a formal bachelor's of physics that I was able to determine on terms of what exactly his degree was on. But it was a BS, a bachelor's of science. Afterwards, during his time at the university, he spent about a year as a lab assistant with Robert Millikan, who I had to actually go look up. This is his picture over here on the right. He was, his claim to fame is that he determined the magnitude of the charge of the electron, which won him the Nobel Prize. And sometime during his college years, Hubble's father moved the family back to Louisville, Kentucky in around 1909. It wasn't quite a reason that I was able to find for this move. It seemed like there was a conflicting reported that Hubble's father wanted to give the family a little bit of quiet time and getting away from the city. But it's not really much of I could find that was solid as to the reasoning for Hubble the move for his family. So after graduating college, Hubble accepted a Rhodes Scholarship Award, where he went overseas to Britain for and attended the University of Oxford for about 3 years. And I promised to his father, Hubble actually did not pursue astronomy here. He and actually continued into the law programs as a promise to his father. But he excelled also in Spanish and literature studies. Again, keeping up with his athleticism, he did participate in many boxing and track events, and by one account was also a member of one of the first baseball teams in the British Isles. So very outdoorsy person. During his time in Great Britain, around 1912, Hubble learned that his father was dying, and asked permission and wrote a letter to his father asking if he could return from Oxford to see him. Unfortunately, his father refused and told his son to continue on his studies, and his father died the next year in January. So Hubble never actually saw his father after he left for England. A little bit sad there. So Hubble stayed in England, finishing up his degree. He, again, getting a bachelor's in law, and returned to the US in order to take care of his mother and 3 of his siblings who were still living with her. One of his brothers was also at this time also in university, but I don't remember the name off the top of my head, and I did not write it down in my lecture notes. And upon returning from overseas, he initially worked as a translator for a Spanish import company, translating the various foreign documents so they could be recorded in ledgers and things like that, and then accepted a position as a high school teacher of all things, teaching physics, Spanish, and mathematics. And over here on the right is a picture of Hubble as he was exploring a cave sometime after he returned from Oxford. I'm not quite sure what cave this picture was taken in. It wasn't cited, but here he is crawling around in a cave. Certainly not something you would expect. So he spent a year as a high school teacher at New Albany High in Louisville, Kentucky. And as I mentioned, this is where he taught physics, math, and Spanish, and sharing his athleticism with his students, coaching the teams, the high school's basketball team, where they would eventually earn 3rd place in a state tournament. And by many accounts, he was actually an incredibly popular teacher, particularly with girls, because they were enamored with his English accent and phrasings that he used, because he had spent so many years in England. So, I found that kind of funny. But by many accounts, Hubble himself did not actually enjoy life as a high school teacher. It was one of those things where he was sort of just in it just to help support his family while looking for new things. Over on the right, we have a picture of Hubble, who's here in the center. I don't know if I can turn on my pen. Over here,
That's him standing in the back with the tie.
I don't know if you can see the laser pointer, but that's him with the center with the then high school, New Albany High School basketball team. So around 1914, Hubble, getting bored with high school teaching, reached out to one of the professors at the University of Chicago. I'm not quite sure if Forrest Ray Moulton, excuse me. I'm not quite sure how Hubble was acquainted with Ray Moulton, whether or not he was at one point, Hubble was a student of his, or if it was more of a general, hey, I need a job sort of thing. Can you vouch for me? Who was a professor and was wrote a letter to Ray Moulton asking if there was any graduate work available. Moulton wrote a letter to Edwin Frost, who was then the director at the Yerkes Observatory, praising Hubble and giving a very strong backing. And Edwin Frost decided to hire Hubble as a graduate researcher at the Yerkes Observatory, where he got to use, I think it was the 24-inch refractor at the observatory. And he used that for, Hubble was using that scope extensively for much of his PhD studies over the next 3 years, where Edwin Frost would be serving as his advisor. His dissertation, which I actually did vaguely read, and it was actually, if you want to search for it, it's Photographic Investigations of Faint Nebulae, which you can see this article, or you can just Google it. I think the Harvard University Press, or I think Google Scholar also has the entire article. But very notable for its time. We will mention here that but nebula here also referred to galaxies, as at this point in time, it wasn't until some work that Hubble did about 7 years later, where nebula galaxies were not recognized as separate objects from nebulas. They were considered part of the same thing. And so much of his, I think I have 2 pictures after this to kind of show. Oh, no, there it is. Yeah. So this is the official title of his presentation as it was printed inside of the University of Chicago publications. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see I had this next slide up. So yeah, I'm getting a little ahead of myself there. Excuse me. So as I had mentioned, galaxies, they weren't recognized as distinct objects from nebula for most of the Hubble time. There was some sort of discussion that they might be separate objects, but there wasn't really any observational evidence to help them determine if that was the case. So much of Hubble's work in his dissertation was a focus on what was performing one of the first galaxy surveys with a combination of data that he had collected in his observational efforts using the Yerkes 24-inch reflector, excuse me, and also the Mount Wilson Observatory 60-inch reflector. That should be, excuse me, and prior data, excuse me, from that was collected at another observational run from the Mount Wilson 60-inch reflector. This was kind of the beginning of the era of professional photography astronomy. So all of this data was coming in from glass plates that Hubble was analyzing for his dissertation. And it's large parts of it are just focused on how he was determining positions and the apparent brightness, magnitude, and size of nebula within the photographic plates that he was working with. If you following the rest of this, you see that there's a lot of things inside of his dissertation that influenced many of his later achievements in terms of determining distances with Hubble's Cepheid variables and his later work on cosmic expansion. So you'll definitely one of those things like, oh, so this is where he got all it from. A lot of it was influenced by his PhD dissertation. So here's an example of one of the glass plates that Hubble was looking at. Many of these we noticed today. I was like, oh, these are all galaxies. So now that, so it's one of those things. It's just really cool to just see how it kind of evolves and seeing some of these. Unfortunately couldn't find the index key for this page. It wasn't in some of the page articles I was looking at because they were behind a lock screen. So I can't tell you which of these individual galaxies are. I believe though they were almost certainly all NGC objects given their size and fuzziness. So after in the process of working on his PhD, he actually was kind of in a rush to complete it. George Hale of Mount Wilson was around the beginning of 1917 was looking for new staff for the 100-inch Hooker telescope, which was just completed at the time. And so Hubble was in a rush through to finish his PhD dissertation in order to accept a position at the observatory. Unfortunately, World War I intervened, and Hubble was volunteered into the Army in World War I. He served with the 86th Infantry Division in France, but he never saw combat and eventually was promoted to the rank of major. For those that aren't familiar with how that works, generally, if you have a college degree, when you enlist in the military, that's automatically, you're generally given an officer commission. So given that Hubble started with a PhD, believe but cannot confirm that Hubble started was after he completed his enlistment was automatically promoted to the rank of captain, because getting to the rank of major in a single year from a lieutenant is quite a phenomenal achievement if he did actually go that direction. But I couldn't find anything in terms of enlistment records to know if that was indeed the case. And on the right is a picture of Hubble's military ID as it was issued for him for his tour of duty in France. So he spent about a year and a half in the Army and was honorably discharged in 1918, where he returned to Mount Wilson. So it turns out that Edwin Frost was polite enough to have kept the position open for Hubble, knowing that he was serving overseas. And so Hubble made his way back to Mount Wilson in 1990, where he would remain as a member of the Mount Wilson staff until his death in 1953. When he arrived at Mount Wilson, he was still in uniform and would go around introducing himself as Major Hubble, as Major Hubble, which I found kind of a good chuckle. I mean, that is kind of an interesting way to introduce yourself. And he immediately set out to work. So it turns out that he had developed over the next couple of years, he would develop somewhat of a rivalry with a fellow astronomer, Harlow Shapley. And Shapley was one of the first people to get, well, not one of the first people, one of the people that produced a more modern estimate of the size of the Milky Way galaxy. And he Shapley built on this estimate using work that was pioneered by Henrietta Levitz, who showed that Cepheid variable stars could be used as an accurate measure of distance because they have a uniform scaling. So they always have the same peak brightness and a couple of other characteristics that make them really useful as distance measures in astronomy. Shapley's initial figure estimated the Milky Way to about 300,000 light years in diameter, which we all know today is off by probably about a factor of 3. The current estimate is about 100,000 to 110,000 light years in diameter. So he was off by quite a bit, but it's still a fairly reasonable estimate at the time. And so Hubble, taking the work from Shapley, who was a proponent that like many astronomers at the time, that the universe was the Milky Way. There wasn't anything beyond it. Hubble was kind of skeptical of this claim, in part influenced by the work that he did during his PhD dissertation, where he just didn't quite believe that some of these nebulae were within the galaxy, but didn't have a way to prove it at the time. And so Hubble, using the same techniques that Shapley did with Cepheid variable stars, went on to determine distances to several galaxies, notably the Andromeda Galaxy, Messier 31, and the Triangulum Galaxy, Messier 33. Just because of their proximity to us, it made it easier for him to determine Cepheid variable stars. And showed and published in 1924 that showed that both of those galaxies were well beyond the Milky Way. I think his original estimate for M31's distance was about 900,000 light years, which again, still off by a significant margin, but from today's accepted estimate, of about 2.4 million light years. But it did get the point across that some of these objects that we were seeing in the sky were well beyond the borders of our own galaxy. Hubble would get into a dispute with Shapley over what to call these objects. Hubble, with his colleague Shapley, Hubble preferring to call them extragalactic nebula, and Shapley preferring to call them galaxies. And so I think we kind of all know where that battle went out by now, with galaxies obviously winning out in favor. So after determining that some of these galaxies were indeed objects were indeed well beyond the borders of our Milky Way galaxy, he would, over the course of his observations over the next several years, note that almost all of these galaxies were redshifted. For those unfamiliar with this term, if you're familiar with what the Doppler effect is, whenever you hear a siren from like a police car or a fire truck going down the road as you're driving, and it gets louder as it approaches you and then softer as it gets farthest away, that is the Doppler effect. And so as an object gets softer farther it is away from you is what's known as redshifting in astronomers' terms, where the light from an object as it's moving away from you appears more red. And so Hubble had noted that almost all the galaxies, well, not almost all the galaxies that he was observing as part of his work for trying to establish some distance measures, they were all redshifted, indicating that all these galaxies were actually moving away from the Earth. They were, not sure what to finish with that, but yeah, so they were just moving away from us. So Hubble would spend the next couple of years with Milton Humason, and the pair would go on to determine and measure the galaxy, the redshift and distances of many galaxies, and measure and determine the redshift and relate them to the distance of the galaxy. And they would follow this up with a paper that they published in 1929, showing that there was indeed a linear relationship between how far a galaxy is from us and how intense its redshift was. This would serve as the basis for what has since become known as Hubble's law, and set the groundwork for what would eventually fall out to be proved to show the expansion of the universe. And during the 1910s and the 1930s, in that time period, there's a lot of active physics research. Most notably, we all know, Albert Einstein publishing his special theory of relativity. I think 1914 was the year it was published, 1913, 1914, and then publishing general theory of relativity about 5 years later. So in his work, Einstein made some of his calculations showed that the universe must be either expanding or contracting. Einstein didn't actually this is one of those things that didn't really initially jive well with him. So this is what led Hubble to invent what became known as the cosmological constant, where he added it to his equations in order to try to keep the universe from collapsing in on itself. He eventually called this one of the biggest errors of his professional career. And in 1931, he would personally travel to Mount Wilson and would thank Hubble for his work in validating that, showing that Einstein was indeed correct again in his initial intuition. But it gets kind of weird here in that, despite having some of this evidence here showing that the universe must be expanding, even then, Hubble still didn't actively believe that that was the case, mostly because they didn't have enough equipment to effectively measure this. And the Hubble constant, which is a value that represents how much the rate of expansion of the universe. The first estimates of this constant showed that if the universe was expanding, that the universe would only be about 2 billion years old, contradicting what was then established for the age of the universe. So there's this kind of conflicting evidence here between geography and geoscience and astronomy, and so this was kind of leading a couple with many professional astronomers to kind of still doubt if expansion was indeed the case. They just simply didn't know, and this continued up until 1941, where Hubble was giving a lecture saying, basically all that he said, if there is expansion, the Earth would be older than the universe, which doesn't make sense. So there is still a lot of contention here, and they hadn't quite vetted out the full idea that the universe was expanding at this time. Kind of taking a quick detour, I was kind of interested when I saw William Humason pop up. It was kind of one of those things, is like, when you see names you're not familiar with, you kind of want to learn more about this person, if he did anything else of significant contribution. He actually turned out to be a little bit interesting of a character. So Milton actually didn't complete high school. He dropped out of high school and never went to college. And his involvement with the Mount Wilson Observatory came as he was a hired hand for construction. He would help mules and laborers carry materials up the mountain as the observatory was under construction. And he would eventually become a janitor at the observatory in 1917, where on a fluke of time, he volunteered to become a nighttime assistant, helping out the professional astronomers in their observations, doing menial tasks for them, and was quite popular amongst many of the staff at the observatory. And a very dedicated worker. He was very good at what he did, according to several accounts. And in 1919, Hale, the director of the observatory, ended up making Mount Milton a full-time staff member, which was really unique at the time because he didn't have any formal scientific training, and yet here he was working at a highly professional scientific lab. So it was kind of like one of those things where he had a lot of people were still kind of like this superiority complexes at this time. Just like you don't have a degree, you don't need to be here. He had to put up with some of that. So, but by sheer chance, which is actually really cool here, is Milton missed discovering the planet Pluto. During several of the photographic plates that he was working with at the time, Pluto had actually appeared in about 4 of them. But due to some defects on the plates, he wasn't able to actually recognize that this was indeed a planet. And so his chance to further claim to fame went instead to Climb Tombaugh, who identified Pluto 11 years later. So that's kind of one of the oh, wow, that's a little bit interesting tale for Humason and his work. So after this huge paper, 1929, saying, hey, the universe is expanding. Well, the next major thing that Hubble would publish would be a book called The Realm of the Nebulae in 1936. And he would kind of just drop out of the professional circle for a good while. He wouldn't reemerge until 1949. But he did several works during World War II. He joined he returned as a civilian scientist for the U.S. military during World War II, and would work at the Aberdeen Proving Grounds as a ballistics researcher, helping to improve the performance of bombs, bullets, and just about everything in between. He also invented at this time a high-speed camera, which he would use for his work. And I think this was a significant achievement. And I think they also used his camera for photographing and some of the first atomic explosions at the Trinity test site. But I'm not quite confident on that one. I know I need to do some more researching. An interesting tale is that at one point during his time at the Aberdeen facility, is he would be personally test firing bazookas in order to identify a design flaw with them. Which, if that doesn't sound scary to you, I would certainly not be willing to do that in this day and age, to willingly fire a bazooka when that might blow up next to my face. So he was later awarded the Legion of Merit Medal for his work at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in World War II. And after that, he would return to what would be his final achievement. He was one of the central design figures for and design leads on the Mount Palomar's 200-inch Hale telescope. Unfortunately, Hubble would never actually be able to use the telescope that he had spent much the remainder of his life helping to build. Heart attack in 1949 sapped him of his stamina, and he no longer had the physical abilities to spend long nights in these observatories. He would then go on to die of a stroke in September of 1953, and his wife did not hold a funeral for him, and would never reveal the location of his burial site. So we actually don't know where Hubble is buried to this day, which is most unfortunate. Some other things that Hubble earned and achieved awards that he achieved over the course of his life is he won the Newcomb Cleveland Prize in 1924, the Bruce Medal and the Franklin Medal, which I'm not actually quite sure what those 2 medals are for, or what they were issued to him for, given their time periods. I'm not quite sure. If anyone would have any suggestions about that, I'd be interested to know.
I believe the Franklin Medal has something to do with achievement in science. I couldn't say much more than that.
Gotcha. He would also win be awarded the gold medal from the Royal Astronomical Society. My English is really fluzzing tonight. In 1940, I presume that last medal was also awarded for his work in determining galaxies and cosmic expansion. And as I mentioned, he also won the Legion of Merit Award. Some other things that Hubble is known for, or actually has his name attributed to, is he has a Hubble, an asteroid, 2069 Hubble, named after him. He has a crater on the moon. Obviously, the Hubble Space Telescope, a planetarium in New York, a stretch of highway outside of Marshall, Missouri, where he was born, and a middle school in Wheaton, Illinois, where he lived from the age of 11 until he journeyed overseas to Oxford. And that's kind of it. That's all I got. Here's some interesting references. The Times article here is actually a really good one. There's a lot of interesting things about him. I was trying to keep this short and manageable. Obviously, there's a lot more that could be put into here. But yeah.
And Connor, he also has a postage stamp with his picture on it.
That too. Sorry. Yeah. So any questions, comments? Sorry, I got distracted by an email that came across my phone.
Bravo, good job.
Interesting character.
He was. I was certainly wasn't expecting many of the things that I had found during this. So like,
Not your normal nerd.
no, absolutely not. I mean, most of the astronomers that we had dealt with up at this point have been like, oh yeah, we do math, horoscopes, music. There he goes, like, nope, I'm a sports guy. That was kind of like, oh wow.
I thought the military career was interesting.
One comment you made, Connor, about when he first arrived out of California, he introduced himself as Major Hubble. I think that I wonder if that wasn't one of those things common, especially since he'd spent so much time over in the UK. That was a fairly common thing, especially among British officers, especially after World War I.
Yeah.
Retired
Colonel
or
this,
otherwise.
Major this, General this. Yeah.
Usually
Right.
Major or Colonel, generally not anything below that, but anything above captain level, like say Major, Colonel, or Brigadier. That seemed to be a common thing.
Yeah, I hadn't put that together. That might have been just a quirk from him spending all that time in England and France, where it was just one of those things that you did. And there always, obviously, there's always that transition from military life back to civilian life.
Well, I suspect he may have been a little enamored with, based on your presentation, no other resource, but it seems to have been a little more enamored with an association with the military service, especially going back, even not as a uniform member, but as a civilian, contributing to the war effort, in the area of, sounds like munitions and ballistics. So he wasn't against participating once again.
Well, I mean, I would keep in mind that, the first half of the 20th century within the US, it was a very high patriotism environment. So, it is quite likely that his initial enrollment into the military was driven more of a sense out of patriotic duty rather than, any fondness for it. And similarly for World War II, so much of that was driven around patriotism and patriotism propaganda. And especially with how many researchers would eventually enlist in the working on the Manhattan Project. So his involvement in World War II as a ballistics researcher is not at all unsurprising to me.
Yeah. So Connor, you didn't say anything about his wife.
There was really not much mentioned
about
about
whether
her.
she was into astronomy or physics or math or anything like
Almost all,
that?
almost all the articles that I was reading, there might be more in his official biography,
But they were
which I
pretty
did not,
silent?
which did not read, but most of the articles are talking about Hubble and his achievements and very little about his family life.
Ah, okay.
Did he
Fact,
have any
almost-
children?
I do not know off the top of my head.
Okay,
Again,
I just-
it wasn't one of those things that was
Gotcha.
mentioned in all. I assume yes, but I could very well be wrong.
Right.
Definitely some excellent questions, and for the children one, I actually can't believe I didn't think to ask that before.
Ah,
But
okay. So
Yeah,
the
man.
Franklin Award, I've got a chat here. The Franklin Award from 1939 was for studies of extragalactic nebula.
For the Franklin Award.
Yeah.
So that would probably be in referencing to his 1924 work. Then would be my guess. No, that would be for his work on expansion. If they're explicitly calling out extragalactic nebula,
Extragalactic nebula, yeah.
yeah, they very well be that they very well be from his work on cosmic expansion, which would make sense because that's definitely the more notable achievement that was crowned his way.
Sister sent that to me. My sister just chatted that to me.
Thank you very much for sharing. That's all I have for the evening. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to leave this running if you guys want to have just chat about very topics. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and the screen
All right,
share.
so